How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another video. And if things just seem to be going from bad to worse for Sony, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better anytime soon. The relationship with Arrowhead is getting tenuous at best. It is really strained at the moment. Sony is clearly towing the company line here, and even though it's not in people's faces, if you look at the tweets that are coming out, everything is there for you to see. It's pretty awful at the moment, with Arrowhead throwing Sony under the bus and trying to act like they didn't know anything, but they clearly did. And all of this is now coming out as Sony is pretty much telling them, stop lying. And, you know, we're looking at a situation where, as you can see on screen, all of these countries are now, just unable to access the game. And, we've seen over here in this little clip here that if you haven't seen it, go check out my previous video, that Ukraine now can't even create accounts based on the web. They actually have to do it through a console. So if they don't know anyone with a 3, 4, or 5, they have to go and buy a console to spend up to $500 to just create an account to play Helldivers. This is insane. And of course, this has given rise to more stupidity. You've got over here, Helldivers 2 has been removed from Steam for players in non-PS supported countries, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, this isn't just them removing it off the actual Steam, store. Apparently, if you try to boot the game up in any of these countries, the game just crashes. I don't know if that's actually true, to be fair. I've just seen 4 or 5 people now saying that are from those, countries like Singapore, but they try to boot the game up and it will crash instantly when it wasn't. No update has been done or anything. The game just now outright crashes. I guess the game is looking internally for a certain handshake, and if it's receiving an area IP code from a certain country, it just instantly sends the root kill and basically stops the game from booting. That's awful. So even now, there's at least a few more weeks before this deadline hits, and it seems like they're just guillotining everything off the bat. Weesh here says, PlayStation Network isn't supported by my country. What do? I don't know. It's like, well, you should know, because this is something that you would have known about for months. This is something that you would have created and had, installed into the net code, which is one of the first things you do when you're building a game. So for Arrowhead to come out and say that they had no idea about this and it was sprung on them, it's clear lies. They were lying from the offset. I was talking to my buddy Powerboss about this yesterday in my stream. He finally understood that, they were lying. And as we're about to see, they finally come to terms and open up that they were lying. They have known about it, and not just for 6 months like they say. They've known about this since they started building the project, because you don't just integrate PSN on a whim as an add-on. It's something that you do from, the inception of the project. This was always the intention. And as it had it on the Steam page, it's clear that it was always the intention. This wasn't something that was sprung on them. So they knew that this was coming. It just wasn't working for launch. And of course, people are already refunding the game like they should do. But my God, the turmoil, the rift between Arrowhead and Sony right now must be magnanimous. Just look at it this way. Arrowhead did the biggest cardinal sin you could possibly think of. They basically threw their employer under the bridge. They burnt their employer. Sony is their employer. Sony hired them to make a game, and they basically, fully well knowing, decided to lie that they didn't know anything, and then said it was all on Sony. And, this is a Sony decision, but the fact is these people knew about it. But they acted like they didn't and just threw everything at Sony to try and deflect the blame. Honestly, who is going to want to work with Arrowhead now? They've got some great developers, but as a company, who is going to work with someone like that? That is literally radioactive. That is a ticking time bomb. Anyone that wants to work with these people now has a red flag over their heads, because at any point, if something goes wrong for whatever reason, maybe a bad launch or a bug in the game, they're just going to turn around and throw you under the bus. That is the Arrowhead way now. And I'm sorry to, put more shit on Arrowhead, but this is unprofessional of them, and you don't do that. You've got this over here from the Ackman. Sony is effing insane. Arrowhead weren't given details on how this new update for Helldivers 2 would work with regions that can't make a PSN account. How do they F this up so badly? So Ackman here is clearly blaming Sony for this, and in terms of how this will actually work for those regions, he's absolutely right. This part here is full on Sony, and we covered this in my previous video, but first of all, it's Sony's decision, and it was Sony's decision from when the game was being developed, not just now, from developed, so they knew about this, not ours. Secondly, we don't have all the details about region related issues yet. This is something that should have been discussed from the very beginning. I mean, the fact that different regions don't have PSN should have been something that was brought up. This is literally as part of the discovery phase. This is something that should have been there, especially when they're given the list of countries where it's going to work, right? We're chasing Sony to get more info, and all of this was basically them just throwing Sony under the bus. It wasn't anything good. You don't do that. But they decided that they were going to act innocent and try and deflect all the blame onto Sony, and it didn't work. You've got over here CEO of Arrowhead Games, who made Helldivers 2, knew about PSN links 6 months ago. He didn't tell us that the players wouldn't be able to access the game they legally purchased when they activate account linking again 3 months later, the game released. This is worth a lawsuit against Sony. So the biggest problem here is the fact that Sony sold the product in countries where PSN doesn't exist. That's a big problem, right? That's a problem. Because Sony clearly knows what countries do have PSN and what don't have PSN. And they have since, as I've said, removed them from all those countries. But it's too little too late. You don't do that after the fact that people have spent their money. You don't literally walk in and say, right, give me all your money. You take the money, you leg it, and then say, psych. That's not how this works. Now, Palstead here says, I do have a part to play. I am not blameless in all of this. It was my decision to disable account linking at launch so that the players could play the game. This is not true, right? Because it was announced it was a bug. And Sony corroborated that information, that linking was not working at launch. Now, whether he deliberately jeopardized that linking himself could be true, but that was not the information that Halstead actually released to the general public. The information released was that it was bugged for launch and it would be implemented later. I did not ensure players we were aware of the requirement and we didn't talk about it enough. Absolutely, you did not talk about it enough. You could have put bulletins in the game, you could have put scrolling text in the game, that this is something that's going to happen and you should be aware of it, and if it's not available in your country, you should not be playing this game. It's that simple. But clearly they wanted their bonuses too, and they wanted their money too, and just like Sony, both of them decided that they were going to keep quiet about it and capitalize off people. This isn't just a one-party blame here. Arrowhead is as much to blame as Sony. The biggest blame for Sony is that they know what countries this game isn't being sold, can't be sold in, because they know which countries don't have PSN. And this information should have been relayed to Steam. And that is why Steam is doing the only thing available to them in refunding them, the game to anyone that wants a refund, because at this point they just don't want anything to do with this radioactive situation. It's pretty damn awful, and it's just not going to get any better, right? It's just not. And the only solution they have right now is just to make this game not require PSN. But you've got this over here. Helldivers 2 dropped under 50% positive reviews all time. You know how hard it is to get 200,000 negative reviews in 72 hours for a previously well-liked game. It's actually not that hard because you do have herd culture on Twitter and it spreads around, and there are people that maybe have played the game for 4 hours, but they're going to downvote it anyway. But it is still an impressive feat to get 200,000 negative reviews in 72 hours. It's still an impressive feat, but it is possible, as we've seen. Right. But this is awful, right? This from Halstead. The fact that he's now saying that they knew about it for 6 months. We knew for about 6 months before launch that it would be mandatory for online PS titles. They knew from the very beginning. This is something that would have been in the requirements for the game. This is something that would have been when you scope a project to a development team, this would have been part of the scope. They would have known about this. You don't just add this sort of a big change request midway through. This is something you bake in at the beginning. So even here, they're lying. Clearly, they're just lying. You've got Grums over here. The fire is just getting out of control. Sony delists Helldivers in 177 countries. CEO admits they knew of the requirements 6 months ago. It's just getting bad. Here he is again. The community manager lead for Helldivers 2 is happy she can ban more people now. Look, as someone who has dealt with massive banning in World of Warcraft versus gold farmers and cheats, I can tell you this. The reason is BS. You do not need PSN to ban more effectively. No, that's not what they're doing it for. What they're doing it for is if you have a PSN account, you might be inclined to go and buy a PS5. But at that point, if they ban that account, you'll lose all your access to your PS5 games as well, and your PS4 games maybe that you're going to buy. But you'll also lose access to all your Sony games. So if you want to actually play them again, you'll have to buy the game again. I mean, this is me just thinking out the box here. But you can see her saying this. Well, we always knew this day would get here. It's going about how I expected. I'm actually happy for us to be able to take action against player reports and make the game safer across the board personally. It's not the type of information you want to be giving, right? It's not. Now we're looking at this over here, and the date is really important because the 5th of May over here, this is the, Arrowhead have been throwing all the blame and all the shade on Sony since the 4th and I think the 3rd of May. Since this whole thing started, my guess is someone from high up in Sony basically came over to this dude and said, hey, look, you've already crossed lines that will never be mended. You need to go out there and take some responsibility because you knew about this. Don't come to any of us. Don't go out there and say that you had no idea and that no one in your team knew about it or any of this. The whole team knew that this was a requirement. And if they didn't know, that's your responsibility. We gave you a scope with a list of requirements for the game. You then took that scope, gave us a time that this can be done, basically a generic development cycle. Whether they're working agile or waterfall is another matter. But, if we're scrolling up, in this moment to tweet, what? You guys don't... Is this the moment to tweet, what? You guys don't have phones? I mean, even now he's trying to make light of the situation, and I think it's just absolutely disrespectful, right? On a serious note, we are talking solutions with PlayStation, especially for non-PSN countries. Your voice has been heard, and I am doing everything I can to speak for the community, but I don't have the final say. You should have been doing this from, the beginning of development, not now. Why is this being done now? Why is this being brought up now? You knew about this for maybe 2 years, not 6 months. And even if we go to 6 months, you knew about this. Why didn't you fight for this then? Why are you doing it now? Because clearly back then you didn't care. But now that it's actually affecting you as a company and you are now being shown actual negativity and hate, now you actually care and you're trying to get on the community side. This is BS. Sony is equally to blame, if not more, right? But Arrowhead is part of this whole situation. People thinking that Arrowhead isn't is being delusional. They are a part of the problem. And this whole message here, this one here, this message that he released yesterday now, I guess for me, today for you guys in the US, if it's still today, I guess. But this message here reeks of Sony Corp, the Sony suits actually coming out and saying, you need to go out there and post something to take some of the heat off us because you fully well knew that this was coming and you guys didn't do anything to try and prevent this from happening. They did, make a blog update and they did say that this was a issue and it wasn't going to happen during launch. That's fine. But that message should have been drilled and drilled and drilled every single day. Maybe a splash screen in the game to let people know that a PSN account would be required, right? Because they knew. They knew. To say that they didn't know is just a false fallacy. They are lying. And honestly, this is something that I'm not seeing anyone really talking about. But the feud now, the complete broken relationship between Arrowhead and Sony, that is not mending anytime soon. I'm pretty sure if there was any discussions for Sony to buy Arrowhead, that's dead now. But the big question right now is who will work with Arrowhead? Sony has become, you know, public enemy #1, and what they're doing is pretty awful. It's piece of shit material, especially to those people that actually bought it, and Sony should be taken to court for this. Selling a game under false pretenses in a country that doesn't have PSN access, and then even from the day one you were going to make it mandatory and still sell it in that country, that should be illegal. It is illegal. That's selling a game under false pretenses for access. So they should be sued for that. But Arrowhead to act like they had no idea when they built the game and, you know, built the code for PSN into the game from day one of development, that's when this would have started. The fact that they're lying, who's going to want to work with a company like this that is basically throwing their employer under the bus, calling out their employers, calling them liars, telling people to go after their employer, and, you know, they are literally just washing their hands of all responsibility when they have a huge amount of responsibility. I think this, I don't see anyone working with Arrowhead going forward. It's a shame because they actually made a really good game and they actually delivered pretty damn well. And this game potentially could have got at least ongoing game of the year, right? Ongoing game of the year, it probably would have got that. I don't think it would have got game of the year. There's too many games coming out with high contention for that. But this isn't it. You don't do that to your employer. That's how you get completely and utterly blacklisted from the industry. And that's exactly what they did. And this rift now between Sony and Arrowhead, where is it going to go? Are they just going to shut the servers down? If enough people refund the game and the numbers drop down to 10,000, I mean, some people are estimating this game is going to drop down to 10, 20,000. If that's the case, will Sony even bother keeping the servers up? Time will tell. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, but this is silly. This is absolutely silly and stupid. And you can clearly see that the date of this doesn't coincide with his sincerity. It's clearly one of the suits from Sony telling him to own up to his mistakes. They are part of the problem and to stop throwing everything on Sony. But Sony, on the other hand, should be sued, or at least taken to court for false advertising, false selling, misleading the community, selling under false pretenses, selling a product that just doesn't work, right? Because they won. If this account linking and PSN was working, I bought the game in the Philippines, this game would not boot. It would not work. If it even booted, I couldn't sign in because I can't get PSN. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. This is crazy. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace out, everyone. Remain legend.